Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to take a look at the dead zones for MOTORSLICE. This is being demonstrated on the Xbox Series X in case it differs on other platforms. But to get into it, starting with movement, we have a 28% radial dead zone. And there is full diagonal movement if we move right around this horizontal threshold. You can see pretty clearly that the character's animations reflect those angle changes. And if we trace the dead zone, we can see that we have a smooth progression between the full 360-degree range with no gaps of limited diagonal movement. For the movement speeds, there are only two. So from the dead zone to the shaded region is your walk range, and this is just a flat speed, and the shaded region represents your run speed. So, movement is perfectly good. For the camera, we have a 20% radial dead zone. And still full diagonal movement. So it's very subtle, but these bobbing motions are being reflected, but it's much easier to see when capping the view like this and looking for horizontal movement. Move to a location that has a bit more reference. The diagonal changes are still very subtle, and that's an issue with the curve, and we'll get to that right now. So the curve is a subtle S-curve, but you can see that it starts out much faster than expected. It seems that this curve is scaled around a 0% dead zone, and this dead zone is functionally cropping off the lowest part of the curve, but otherwise, being a subtle S-curve, it starts a little slower than normal, but then speeds up a little faster to make up that difference, and then tapers off at the very end. Now we can't see the edge of the curve, at least with the way I'm testing, but it does start slower, and it seems like this curve is applied per axis rather than per magnitude, and what that means is it's taking the distance from the horizontal and vertical axes individually and applying the curve to them separately, rather than finding the distance from the center and applying the curve. And that has two main effects. One is it generally makes diagonal movement slower, because if we look at the vertical component, this is our 0 point, and since the curve is starting slower, that means our vertical movements are going to be slower right around this axis, and that's going to slow down our diagonal movement. And same around the horizontal axis, because it's being applied separately there. Another general thing is that at least slower starting curves slow down your general diagonal movement because of that. So your broad movements like this within this circular range are going to be slower than they should be. You can see that my stick can lean outside of this circular region and the diagonals. Now, normally for games with axis-based curves, if your stick was able to move all the way to the corner of the stick module, you could actually get faster diagonal movement. So you'd have slower diagonals within the circular range, but if you're able to move far enough into your diagonal regions, you'd be able to move faster. But what it seems like they've done here is cap the magnitude to 100. So this is a 100% deflection, and if I move the stick further, that's maybe 110% or so. It's ignoring that and treating that 110% as if it was just 100, which is ideal if you're setting up the curves radially. But with the way they've set it up here, those clamped values are then being applied to, are being used for the curve, and that's meaning that your general diagonal values are slower than normal. Now when testing, this wasn't too dramatic. This is a pretty subtle S-curve, so it's not as extreme as if you're using, say, a quadratic axis-based curve. But when testing the perfect diagonals when clamped, so right here, this speed should be 70% of the perfect horizontal, so this would be 100%, this should be 70.7, and what I tested was about 65%, so really about a 5% difference. That's not a lot, but it does indicate that this is being set up per axis and is a little slower than it should be. This matters more for like shooters, and this game you're mostly going to be platforming, so you only need your camera for very broad movements, and this camera works perfectly fine for that. But I just spent a long time, describing that just to show that there are ways to, idealize the camera even if you don't really need it. So the last dead zones for the game are controlling this screen cursor, and you could use either stick to control it. And there's only one difference between the two. So both of them will use 20% radial dead zones. And they have full diagonal movement, which is pretty easy to see, capping the view along the borders of the screen like this. And the right stick, you can see the difference pretty clearly. Same full diagonal movement. So the only difference between the two is the left stick has a linear curve. So it starts at 0 at the edge of the dead zone and then smoothly increases till full stick tilt. The right stick also uses a linear curve, but it is unscaled, or specifically it's scaled around 0%, and this dead zone is cropping the first 20% of your output. So you start at 20% and then continue linearly beyond that. So for the right stick, you have quite a bit less precision because of that. But since you're going to be using the A button for these scenes, the left stick will be more convenient anyway. But overall, that covers the controls for this game. Now, while I've mentioned a couple gripes for, say, the right stick in this case being unscaled, and for the camera, both the unscaled nature of it as well as the axial curve implementation, this is mostly a platformer, and for that, the movement dead zone is good. So overall, the controls I would rate as good. But, you know, there are always ways to do the controls better. But that about covers things. So, everyone, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day.
What are you doing?